Hello, everybody. I hope that most of you have had an easier time getting here than me. Welcome to our people that are joining us this afternoon for I think it's our third session. Our third session of information sharing, of having webinars, the weekly webinar series. It seems to be going well. We're getting positive feedback, and it's nice to have so many people in the room. Let me just make sure that we're going to have a little bit of a time. We always wait sort of 2 or 3 minutes because people log in right on the moment. So if you would be patient with us, just give us a few minutes, and then we are going to introduce our speaker for this afternoon, open the floor for discussion, and actually have, a very fruitful time. I find that we are able to really ask questions about aspects of work, get people to be interested in the type of work we can provide and the type of studies we can put out there. And today will be no exception. I think there's going to be some really good matters here discussed. It is a topic that is close to the heart of many people in Treasury. I look forward to hearing more. Let's just give it a few moments. What are we saying in the room at the moment? We've got 33 people. That sounds lovely. Let me start talking a little bit around Dr. Li Pernegger. Li, welcome. Thank you very much for being available. It's good to have you here, but it's also very good to have had you join GTAC since 2019 as one of the long-term advisors that's specializing specifically in local government. And as you all know, that there are many challenges in our local government space in South Africa. She's finished her PhD, and she's also written a book. The book that we can refer to is The Agnostic City, State and Society Strife in Democratic Johannesburg, and looking at sort of the conflict in the city governance. And I think we understand that Joburg has been a prime case to look at some of those issues for us. She's worked both in terms of policy space and has had 30 years of experience, but she's also had some real, so policy space in both the state and academia, but also some real hands-on delivery experience. She's worked on regenerating areas of decline. She's worked on a big grant funding for township development in Johannesburg for South African Treasury. So she's been deeply involved in thinking around local government, both from a policy and academic perspective, but also really understanding some of the concerns that you encounter only once you start to implement. And I think that's important for us. Li has a PhD in planning. She has an MBA, and she is a Bachelor of Architecture in degree as well. So Li, thank you very much. Thank you for agreeing to talk to us this afternoon, and we look forward to hearing from you. What will happen, as always, is Li will make a presentation. She's got some slides that he'll talk to, and then there will be a time for questions and answer. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Renette, for that introduction. I love being called an expert. Always makes me giggle, because I think if anybody knows, when you work in local government, there's no such thing as an expert. We're all struggling with these quite complex issues. So thank you very much for having me today to talk to you about my passion, local government, my passion and my biggest frustration in life. So over the next half hour or so, I'll take you through this project that my colleague Corey Smith, who's in the audience, and I did completed last year. So let me switch my camera off so long. What I'd like to do is share a presentation with you that touches on the background of the project, as well as the scope of work that we embarked on, as well as the methodology. Let me see. No.
You can just put it on presentation mode.
Trying to do that. Okay. Unfortunately, it is deciding to go to the end. Right, and I'll look at the status quo of the DDM, the District Development Model, and then move on to the 12 cross-cutting themes that we found in the data, summarize the GTAC's institutional arrangements and capacity advice that we provided, and then to close, I have a very quick look at what has happened since the completion of our study. So when we started, we were advised that the DDM has multiple aims, but is mainly trying to promote socioeconomic development and improve the lives of people in district spaces, and to serve as a spatial mechanism to promote intergovernmental coordination and collaboration, and then of course also to create the one plan and one budget for each of these 52 districts that have been declared. And it was seen as a strategic intervention with many actors, but with the president at the apex as the DDM champion, with the Minister of COGTA as the executive authority of the lead department, and ministers and deputy ministers as district champions. So the organizational environment for the DDM showed that there was pressure on all three spheres of government to impact at the local level, but the interventions thus far have been characterized by intergovernmental relations that was very fragmented, uncoordinated planning, enduring service delivery challenges, and financial and managerial weaknesses, and even collapse in some municipalities. And so the aim of the project was to advise the presidency on the institutional arrangements and the capacity that it required to support and enable the president and the presidency to champion, oversee, and support the DDM. And the client was, of course, the presidency, but with DPME support. So the GTAC approach was to do a diagnostic assessment and then to provide an institutional advisory note on the back of that through this two-person team of myself and Corey. And the time frame was extraordinarily tight. So we signed the project charter in the middle of January, and the project was completed like 4 months later. So what we did was we used two underpinning concepts to inform the method. And the first one was to try and understand what was the DDM network. And we came up with this diagram after the first meeting or two with the presidency and DPME to try and understand the dynamics of this extraordinarily complex set of relationships in this network. And so what we did is we, with the agreement of presidency, is to focus on the most obvious core and transversal role players that had a technical role highlighted in yellow. So if you look at the diagram on the left, you'll see there's a big yellow bubble with another bubble inside, which is the president and the presidency as two separate actors. The president, of course, is a person, but he's also an institution, if you like to think of it that way. And the president has his own, or at the time had his own critical dominant networks highlighted in the thick green arrows with a number of organizations. So the National Planning Commission, private sector business, civil society, COGTA, of course, and the Presidential Coordinating Committee. And then and of course with the presidency. And then the next set of dominant relationships was between the presidency and then a whole range of other actors. We couldn't, of course, feature all of them because otherwise we'd probably still be sitting here trying to get a handle on what was going on. So that with agreement, we focused on the ones that are in yellow with so-called, let me say, technical roles. But of course, you can imagine SALGA doesn't have only a technical role. It also crosses into a political space. And so we looked at that and the ministerial DDM champions, the National Planning Committee, one of the metro hubs, Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, DPME itself, COGTA, Treasury, CSIR, and DBSA. And those were at that time the presidency's dominant networks. So of course, as you can see, this is not a complete map. I'm sure you can think of others that should have been included and perhaps weren't. And if we had to do the study today, maybe it would be, we would have a different approach. And then the other thing that we looked at is this notion of championship. And that's because the president's role in the DDM circulars was conceptualized as the overall champion of DDM. But of course, that's not ever quantified anywhere. When people in the state talk about championing something, they really don't tell us what that actually involves. And so we did look at the academic literature for some guidance here. And even there are many and varied interpretations of what championship might actually mean. And for those that are interested, there's a little appendix on the presentation which we can circulate after the session. And so the big takeaways we found was champions are really leaders, change agents, and decision makers. They also sponsor both internally and externally a particular initiative. And in some cases, they may have multiple roles that they play simultaneously. So we thought that this meaning of championship, we can tailor that to suit the presidency, and it's understood that the president himself emphasized the importance of providing strategic leadership to the DDM. So this is what's important, I think, for the piece of work that we did, and that the presidency also had to then support him in playing this role. So in respect of the methodology, we collected data through 1 to 2 hour long interviews and focus groups with across 26 respondents in 11 organizations through a purposive selection technique with DPME and the presidency, and some snowballing as well. So you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, these are the organizations that we interviewed. I think many of you in the room will say these are the usual suspects. And they were at the time the most critical players in the DDM network. And I think they really still are. The interview questionnaire as well prompted a kind of semi-structured discussion around 5 main themes in the bottom left-hand corner: the aims of the DDM, their involvement in the DDM, the lessons learned from the DDM so far, their specific involvement with the presidency, and then the potential improvements they thought that would help to achieve the DDM aim. And so what we tried to do was focus on the perceptions of each actor in this DDM network. So we were looking at what is the status of the conceptualization and implementation of the DDM in their terms, because at the time when we started, we heard a lot of like, oh, nothing has happened. And that was actually not what we found at all. And then also for them to highlight their DDM related concerns. And so we took pains also to say that we guaranteeing an anonymity so that we could allow for frankness of their responses. And then what we did is we augmented all of this information with some informal and brief discussions with officials from the Public Affairs Research Institute, Operation Vulindlela, and DPME's Evidence and Knowledge System. And then we also reviewed over 90 organizational documents, academic literature, articles and books, and some others. And some of this information was shared with us on a confidential basis. And then we looked at all of that data for emerging themes. So what I'll do now is just give you a little sense of the status quo of the DDM, bearing in mind that this information now is a little out of date. It was April last year, but it's probably not that dissimilar to where we are now. So what we found is that the conceptualization of the DDM showed that it has multiple aims, which would clearly result in very different understandings of the DDM per actor and how they implement the DDM, how they respond to it. But the main aims that we think are understood across all of the actors was that the DDM is trying to foster inter and intra-governmental coordination and collaboration, support the drive for development, and can serve as a tool for spatial planning and for service delivery. And there are many, many more aims as well that were articulated during the interviews, which we've included in an appendix for those that are interested. Even within one focus group, these views would differ. So you can see it's extraordinarily difficult to have a kind of a common approach to the DDM. And the DCOG itself also added new aspirations to these aims as late as February 2021, when they presented to the Portfolio Committee. So of course that will account for the differences in take-up experiences of the DDM across the network. So firstly, if we look at DCOG, Department of Cooperative Governance, without the TA, so that has a meaning for those that relate to COGTA, and also to DBSA, which is its implementing partner. Well, DCOG in the first instance produced founding documents, a concept note, an implementation framework, and guidelines and draft regulations. They were involved in the launch of 3 pilots in 2019, and it's pretty much stayed at 3 pilots so far. But they also launched 23 districts, and I put that in inverted commas because we're not quite sure what that launch actually entailed. And that was already in 2020. So far they've demarcated all of the hubs, and they've developed district profiles, and they've had a range of engagements at the time the interdepartmental coordination was informal, but they had some slightly more formal engagements with provinces and municipalities, for example, through the Municipal Managers Forum, and then they had quite a lot of engagement with partners and investors. And then they appointed DBSA in March 2020 to manage the DDM implementation in the pilots, in those 3 pilots, including setting up the project management office, resourcing the DDM hubs, and providing support for creating one plans, and also capacity, interestingly enough, to manage the National Disaster Management Center and the Integrated Urban Development Management work. Almost as a side add-on onto this kind of broader DDM work. And DBSA at that time was appointing a service provider for the information management system. So if we come to the President and the Presidency, the President himself is a staunch advocate of the DDM concept across South Africa, and he's spoken about it in numerous State of the Nation addresses and in the media. He's launched the DDM in the 3 pilot districts with the district champions as well. And he chairs the Presidential Coordinating Committee, which is meant to receive reports from provinces. The Presidency itself then supported the appointment of political champions, particularly ministers and deputy ministers for each of the 52 districts. And they all have basic but slightly differentiated DDM-related clauses in their performance agreements. And then the Presidency also provided some guidance to political champions, although this is not detailed. So far, at that time, we saw that they had played a limited role in supporting the President to provide strategic leadership, which is supposed to include a national sector alignment aspect, as well as ensuring coherence of national policy and planning towards district-level development impact. Also, the Presidency is earmarked as the authority to approve and adopt all 52 one plans, according to the DCOG's implementation framework, with DPME to advise on adoption, but neither of those 2 organizations actually had the capacity in place to do that at the time. Then Treasury, of course, a key player, initially supportive of the DDM's potential for spatially based budgeting, which is something that's also close to their heart, and integrated planning and reforms. But they expressed increasing concern about the conceptual and operational aspects of the DDM. And they certainly have engaged with DCOG and transversal departments on DDM. In the DPME, planning, monitoring and evaluation, was involved at the earliest DDM stages and had incorporated some of the considerations into their own revised framework for strategic plans and APPs, annual performance plans, and related guidelines for implementation. And they manage and monitor MTSF performance and outcome data, and they've included some initial targets around the DDM already in the medium-term strategic framework of 2019 to 2024, such as clarifying the institutional arrangements. They're also implementing a central data management system, which was then at the planning stage, and they plan to link this to DDM needs. Then with the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, they were involved in the pilot's establishment, and they've also supported their own minister in launching her district, and prepared a number of spatial profiles which were not used. They've engaged with sector departments on the one plan, and they've also prepared intra-departmental sectoral plans. And this is by no means something that you would see in all of the sector departments. So with the eThekwini district and hub, and we only interviewed one pilot to try and identify the main issues, they've set up the pilot and run their one plan process. And they reported significant challenges with the lack of involvement and guidance from all the spheres of government for preparing the profile and the one plan, and the lack of spatial referencing of projects. They were really frustrated. But what they've done is they introduced 17 area-based management structures at council level and set up technical hubs with officials, as well as a troika of the mayor, municipal manager, the chairs of committees and traditional leaders, and appointed a dedicated official in the eThekwini municipality, which is a significant driver in this particular hub, who then complements the DBSA consultant who's managing the eThekwini hub in the project management office in the DBSA. Mhm. And we also received a whole range of other inputs from SALGA, National Planning Commission, and CSIR, which in the interest of time, I won't go into here. So what they then told us was that there were a number of organizational level concerns that were expressed in that progress that had been made so far. And these we synthesized into 12 cross-cutting themes that informed ultimately our guidance to the presidency on the options on the way forward. So firstly, there's certainly a widespread recognition that the DDM may improve intergovernmental coordination and increase collaboration with social partners. There's almost a yearning that the DDM might provide answers to the difficulties of intergovernmental coordination and collaboration. I think everyone agrees that this is difficult to do. And there was a sense that, although overdue, that the DDM could show the way for the three spheres to work together and make a difference in terms of capital investment, certainly in conjunction with private sector and civil society or social partners. Then secondly, the DDM has energized debate on how to improve intergovernmental collaboration. And maybe we should put in brackets there or not, but certainly spatialization may be a draw card. However, it was felt that DDM's emphasis on spatial planning through the one plans might come at the expense of practical steps to make an impact on the lives of ordinary people in other ways. So although the DDM emphasizes joint planning, to get all the three spheres and all sector departments to work together in each of the 52 districts is proving to be challenging. As you can imagine, try doing it just in one. It's hard. That's what the CSIR was reporting, is it was an incredibly conflictual process that was happening in just one plan. And then the international cases that we found of spatially driven development that were referred to in our discussions with the project team in China, Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, Rwanda were not regarded as particularly relevant because of South Africa's unique constitutional dispensation, which meant that learning by doing is a critical aspect of the DDM, which hasn't really been accommodated. And thirdly, no evidence was seen that central government is working together. And that was a quote from one of the respondents, which is really ironic considering that the central government departments are not finding each other. And that is the main purpose of the DDM, which is to help us to find each other. So what we found was that the emphasis on the response to COVID in the DDM's work gave DDM traction, but also diluted its aims. And then there's no consistent and common messaging of the DDM. So different champions are talking about COVID, they're talking about spatial planning, about intergovernmental coordination, about responses to gender-based violence and femicide, and so on. So it's become a bit of a catch-all, which also then means that everyone's doing their own thing, they're not working together. There was a sense that the main center of government departments should play a stronger role in embedding and guiding the DDM. And this should be the presidency with the DPME, with the Treasury and Land Reform and Rural Development, but possibly also DPSA in support of DCOG. And then the roles of the sector departments were also seen as critical in terms of spatializing development planning and targeting investment. And there were a number of organizations that were mentioned. And these center of government departments could also assist DCOG in aligning the sector department's work with the DDM. And then the roles of each department can be further clarified through engagement and then embedded in the DDM implementation framework. So a lot of loose ends still, including the fact that there's no accountability framework in place. So although there are DDM clauses in ministerial performance agreements, which is a step in the right direction, the DDM would benefit by following a more outcomes-based approach through a clear theory of change. Then fourthly, there's a recognition that DCOG is the right department from a mandate perspective to lead the DDM, but needs to do so in a collaborative way. So there's general acceptance that intergovernmental coordination needs improvement. I think we can all say that, and that the DDM may provide solutions. But DCOG is said to not follow a sufficiently collaborative approach. And that's not my take on it. That is what the respondents were saying. So although there were agreements made at consultative and collaborative meetings, they seem to not be honoured. So that was leading to a dissipation of the goodwill and the energy that had been created in initial discussions and agreements. And then DCOG was seen as having ignored past lessons. The Urban Renewal Development Program, the Integrated Sustainable Rural Development Program, Sienza Manji, Project Consolidate, Back to Basics, etc., etc., etc. There are a number of these initiatives that have played out in South Africa's post-apartheid history to try and encourage better, more streamlined, joined-up governance. And DDM was seen as repeating past mistakes, and that's as quite a high-risk initiative for departments to get involved in. And it was also felt that DCOG was not linking enough to other related concurrent initiatives that were happening at the same time as DDM. So SPLUMA, the Neighbourhood Development Programme, planning reforms, and then Treasury's own alignment work on capital grants and intergovernmental relations, DPME's Integrated Planning Framework Bill, the City Support Program, the IUDF, the Spatial Development Frameworks, the IDPs, and so on and so on and so on. And then, of course, there are other departments that are also trying to get coordination efforts off the ground, and there are many of these, and this was just adding to the general confusion. And there was a perception expressed as well that perhaps DCOG is a little too reliant on DBSA's appointed advisors at the expense of building capacity to be able to do their own interdepartmental collaboration and integration and provide strategic input. So the emphasis on spatial planning, as I mentioned earlier, was felt to be displacing perhaps other kinds of intergovernmental coordination that was also necessary. And then the contents of the DDM draft regulations at that time needed interrogation and building of a capacity across the spheres to implement. Fifthly, there were worrying signs of increasing passive resistance to DCOG and to the DDM. So although there were many intense engagements, particularly around March and August of 2020, some role players appeared to become frustrated with the approach to DDM implementation, with the transversal departments being more frustrated, I think, than others. And then many were not engaging at all. So we saw this at DCOG's implementation meeting on the 18th of February in 2021, where there was just it was a very quiet, passive engagement. Then sixthly, departments are not ready to take on DDM, and there was a need expressed that we should rush a bit slowly. So there's an acknowledgement in that quote that we need to speed up the work on collaboration, but we also need to be a little bit more deliberate about how we do that. We're in too much of a rush to implement, and we're not doing it properly. So, for example, we could have paused to clarify what is low-hanging fruit that could be focused on in the short term, and that is what respondents were saying, versus tackling other more systemic and structural issues over a longer period. And then the time frame for completion of one plans was said to be unrealistic, and an acknowledgement was expressed that these really take years to prepare. And certainly the pace was seen as much too fast without technical forethought and capacity building to do a good job. Departments themselves were expressing that they weren't ready at the leadership and the operational levels to take on DDM, and some had actually delegated DDM to their intergovernmental relations sections, which means it becomes a silo within that particular department, which completely defeats the purpose of the DDM. And so also some of the national departments were saying that they don't have a footprint at the district level, and so they would find it difficult to have a presence in all of them, and the same would be likely to apply at the provincial level too. So although the DDM framework and guideline were seen as helpful, it was seen as much too late. And then some of those interviewed expressed that there was a kind of a synergy dividend that one should ideally get from coordinating across government, but this wouldn't be realized if the DDM, the course of the DDM wasn't corrected. And there certainly was no inclusion of planning capacity for cross-district prioritization In other words, across sectors, spatially, or say perhaps the type of challenge within the DPME or presidency. Meaning, of course, if you have a particular water service delivery issue, if it was just planted in one district plan, but it actually affected a number of districts, nobody actually has an interest in making sure the coordination across districts or some districts is happening. Then seventh, the perception is that the DDM in the current form would not make the kind of difference on the ground it hopes to if the approach is not changed. So at the time of the study, there was no evidence that the benefits were reaching people on the ground, one of the aims expressed. And even the successes that are claimed, like Waterberg's public-private growth initiative, predated the DDM. And the DDM was seen as too idealistic and perhaps not practical enough, and the one-plan profiles didn't adequately reflect the problems on the ground. And so there's a tendency also to push the one plans down to the municipalities when the focus should be on the department's contributions to the one plans. Then eighth, the lessons learned appear minimal to date. So I think, to be fair, the DDM is new, so what lessons there were spoken about appeared to be anecdotal rather than empirical. So, for example, OR Tambo reportedly showed that there was some duplication in government programs that they were addressing through the DDM initiative. And the overall DDM concept and the processes themselves were not being refined from the lessons that were being learned in the processes of one plans and the pilots and the engagements. And lessons that they were in place hadn't been properly documented or shared. And then ninth, certainly what was seen as critical by almost all the players is some form of open access by all to a central repository of data, rather than what is dispersed pockets of data in DBSA, in the DPME, and the CSIR, for example. They have a district barometer, and there are other databases as well that we're aware of. And that kind of information has to really suit a number of needs, linking the work, the spatial data to inform the one plans, tracking and measuring progress, for planning purposes, for coordination, for quantifying benefits, and at all, of course, at different geographic and spatial levels. Then, coming to the end of the themes, the 10th one is that the championship that is needed at technical administrative levels as well, not all well. Although the wide-ranging political support is commendable and a lot of effort has been put into that, it needs to be matched by also technical support and technical championship. There's no evidence of championship within departments to drive the technical aspects of the DDM, except in DCOG. And some departments seem to view DDM as purely an IGR initiative, which of course it isn't, although it's a critical aspect of it. And devolve this, as I said earlier, to the IGR section, rather than recognizing its all-of-government approach. And those district champions themselves also need technical support, and that's not clear whether it comes from their departments or from the hubs. Then 11th, there's an overriding wish for the president and or the presidency to be the overall DDM champion. So that there's this desire that was expressed for the president to marshal everyone behind him for the DDM. And there's certainly a disappointment that at high office that for not giving enough direction to the DDM and in more tangible ways. And a need for the strong leadership by the presidency with the support from the other centre of government departments in partnership with DCOG. And then lastly, the presidency family itself, family in inverted commas, is seen as weak and fragmented by the respondent actors. So these include the DPME, the presidency itself, and various pieces of the presidency's organization. They're seen as separate entities with their own cultures, their own imperatives, and so on, and they're not working together as well as they should. And there's certainly no readiness and limited capacity within the presidency to engage with the DDM issues. And this will be especially obvious when the 52.1 plans emerge and need approval, and when the MNE of the planned outcomes is required. So then, coming to my last slide now, we looked at the institutional arrangements. And at the project team meetings, the presidency's DDM championship role was regarded as critical, while also recognizing and reinforcing the mandate and the role of DCOG as the DDM lead department. So 2 course correct options were proposed, other than just leaving things the way that they were at the time, and each required slightly different institutional arrangements were put forward to the presidency. So the first option was for the DDM to be led by the presidency in partnership with DCOG and other centre of government departments. And then for the second option, for the DDM to be led by DCOG in partnership with the presidency and other centre of government departments. So since we completed this assignment, it appears that option 1 was adopted, but we're not entirely sure, given the indications that a presidential steering committee comprising key departments has been established, chaired by one of DPME's DDGs. And in the advice that was given, we also recommended that a multi-departmental steering committee work on refocusing the DDM and strengthening those interdepartmental and intergovernmental collaboration links, as well as the social partnerships. And this work would also include, but not be limited to, clarifying the DDM's intentions, the key priority being to define what DDM success will look like. That is to say, to define the DDM's theory of change, to clarify its performance indicators, support the development of data and information management systems, as well as performance measurement and reporting mechanisms. And then also to note that the processes for the 1 plans are underway or have been complete. I'm not 100% sure. I'm sure I read something about them being complete, although I have not seen them myself. But we also note that DCOG lost key officials that were driving the DDM processes. Sector departments, we believe, we are reported to still not be on board, and some have reported frustrations at exclusion from the DDM decision-making processes. And what we've seen also is that the president is actively still championing the DDM. So he was in the Ugu district, for example, in last November, and has just completed a presidential imbizo to Northwest Province around the Mahikeng area district in March. I think it was just last weekend or the weekend before. And I believe that the regulations are underway and they're due for gazetting in April. So let me end there and say that to conclude that although this is my own impression, it's not part of the GTAC assignment, is I think the DDM is a program with significant potential to support intergovernmental collaboration and cooperation, but that seems to be stuck in a few places, partly due to its multiple and unclear aims. But also the DDM is a hugely complex undertaking that appears to be implemented in a largely technocratic manner without forethought of the enormity of the resultant change management implications experienced by each actor in the DDM network that also need to be managed in a purposeful way. Without taking that into account, my sense is that the DDM may not live up to its potential. So on that note, Renette, I'm handing back over to you to lead our discussion. And thank you, everyone.
Renette,
Can you believe it? After how many years of doing it, one still forgets. I was clapping hands for Lee here in my lonesome self and my study. Thank you very much, Lee. I find it very interesting. It's not something I'm very familiar with, but I'm sure there are many people in our audience of nearly 70 people that would like to ask you some questions. So let me open it up. Please put your hands up if you have a question, and we can start going through the type of discussions that we're trying to engender here in these debates. So if I can see any of the hands coming up while people are doing a thinking, I'm going to ask you a question, which is around, I'm looking at your study and Marijeng, I see you. I'm looking at your study and I have a sort of methodological question that I want to ask you is, perhaps you didn't have time for it today, but it seems to be very focused on the views of all of the players in this network, as you analysed right in the beginning in slide 2 for us. And why did you choose to go this sort of like survey route of asking people's opinions? And was there a sort of attendant technical analysis? Because if something is so structurally stuck, I often wonder, it's not because people don't want to, it's because they can't, because technically it doesn't make sense to people. Or what's your view on that? Am I right? Am I wrong? And then I'm going to give Madijeng a chance to also come in. But Lee, put your camera on so we can have a nice discussion with you. It's nice to see a face. And there we go. Let me ask you, answer on my first question.
Yeah, I'm actually not quite sure how to answer that. It seemed to be the right thing to do because the DDM seemed to be stuck in the terrain of the relationships, as opposed to necessarily in the technical work. And not to say that there aren't issues in the technical work, because it is quite a technocratic program. It's very kind of top down, and it's been created by one department and then disseminated to a whole range of other departments. And it is a technical change project, but it is also more so a change management project, and that was never factored into anything. But that seemed to be the and I'm repeating myself, that seemed to be the issues that were coming up in our initial scoping of the work. So that led to then the qualitative research approach, as opposed to kind of a hardcore analysis of the program. Also, the DDM itself hadn't enjoyed a lot of traction, so it was very hard to look at it from a technical point of view. So that's where we got to in the methodological approach. But Corey, I think, should also add here, my partner in crime, who is hiding in the audience.
But let me give Madijeng and then Jan Hutting, Madijeng Kaleni and Jan Hutting a chance to speak, and then perhaps Corey, you could also come in. Madijeng?
Yeah, so this is IGR, and you can see the hands are IGR here, because it has been our business over the years to coordinate across the spheres of government. And I must say, we probably have been the department that has consistently and coherently and programmatically drove the process of trying to pull the three spheres of government to work together. So I do believe that we had, methods of doing that. We have platforms of doing that. But we also acknowledge that there were problems. There were problems of pulling departments into actively playing their role into the spaces. So I do think that we had a track record. So in that, the question that I ask myself is, why is it that DDM is finding its challenges in terms of finding, traction, when in fact, at its core, it is really trying to crack the problem that everybody acknowledges, that we all know that we will get more value if we are coordinated and aligned, right? So I think that's the key question. And I think the fact that it is the president himself that actually began to pinpoint at the problem of why the state is failed, part of the problem, and took it upon himself to say, this is something that is important. It's something that I want to champion. So you would say that it really was a powerful, start and initiation of the concept of the development DDM, so to speak, because of the manner in which it was, because we felt that was what was missing in terms of getting and rallying departments and making it the mission, of government to make sure that this happens. So hence we were happy when it started. So now, I think for me, the challenge is, why is it that it didn't? I do believe that part of the problems that you raised, that the way it was then conceptualized in practice did not learn from the lessons of other programs, did not build on what is already there out there, right? So there was a thing of, we want to create something new, that then runs parallel. That then makes people feel like they have to then have more people to do the work for DDM. It wasn't about pulling people to make DDM part of their work because it is going to add value to the work that they do. So in that way, you will see that COGTA was trying to capacitate itself so that it can run this thing that is running. But now it was never talking about departments to say, what capacity do you have then to do this thing that seems to be extra? So I do think perhaps where the problem is in terms of how they conceptualize its operationalization, not its in terms of its core, its vision and what it's trying to achieve. I don't think anybody questions that. But I think in terms of how then it was implemented, there became a problem because it said to the department that has no cooking clue in terms of how you drive intergovernmental coordination or any program sustainably, right? Because they touch and go. So then, in a broken department like that, and then you give them that. So they felt that, oh, we have been given something that makes us at least seem relevant out there. And then they then isolated this thing and put it out there and then failed to make it to be something that brings some kind of dividends that we're bringing. Because if those dividends from the synergy, that it brought in terms of intergovernmental would actually have rallied people. So maybe that's for me was part of the problem in terms of where it actually said the weakness in the departments, the failure to learn lessons, the failure to leverage other departments, the fact that they are making it now a technocratic thing that says president wants this, therefore you must do it, and this is the way you should do it, right? So now my next question is, having had all these things, how did we get this study to be engaged with between the presidency and COGTA itself? I mean, how did it land? In terms, because I do think that is really pinpointing at the problems. But what I wasn't sure is how did it land? Did people see this as challenges, or they just brushed it aside? Yeah, so I think maybe that is where I want to pause. I'm sure my team that is at pain with this DDM would have a lot to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Marijeng, and I really appreciate the straightforwardness of the questions and the comments. I mean, this is Treasury space. We talk honestly. We deal with the problems. Lee, I'm going to ask Jan to come in and then give you space to answer. And then the next round of questions will be Sibongile Mazibuko and Lindiwe Ndwela. Jan?
Thanks, Renette, Lee, and colleagues. Thanks for the opportunity. Again, I think your presentation is fairly comprehensive. It covers all the focus areas. Now, part of my questions is we've been wrestling with similar things for a long time. One of them is the point that Marijeng has made about intergovernmental relations. It's a very complex, very difficult area of work, and it needs to be structured. It needs to be systematic. It needs to be logic. But in your discussions, did you get any bright ideas of how we can, because we've got even Intergovernmental Framework Relations Act that's supposed to facilitate the relationships between the three spheres of government, but then there needs to be structures that you need to use to help you to facilitate that. But was there any wisdom that you've experienced on this journey of somebody that I've idea how we crack this problem? Because in IGR, as Marijeng has indicated, we have had this thing for a long time. I can't remember how many years she's in IGR, but I think I'm now 21 or 23 years, and we're wrestling consistently with this matter. So any brave ways that you've come along your journey? The second comment is joint planning in a government system is extremely complex, difficult, because although the IDP is the vehicle in the space of local government, that means people must participate. National departments must participate, provincial departments. And if you talk to municipalities, they'll tell you that nobody pitch because they also don't organize their process as well. And therefore, in the work that the city support team has done in the space of the metros, at least we've tried to facilitate where you bring those parties together, and it's a lot of energy, a lot of drama. And the point that Marejing has made, today the senior person is in a meeting, tomorrow there's another three, and the one have no clue what the left and the right hand has contributed. The third point I want to make is, yes.
I'm gonna go time out. 2 questions per person. We
Okay,
can
no, that's fair. That's fair.
Please. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. It's up to you now. And Corey?
I don't know if Corey wants to go first.
Yeah, I think I need to switch on my camera. I don't know. I haven't got the best of face to show you, but nevertheless, I think what I would like to respond to is the issue about if there's any kind of bright ideas, to come. And I was kind of thinking it might not be a novel idea, but the idea to bring the center of government departments together first. It's almost like, when you're busy with kind of complex change management, people talk about the container approach. So look at containers, the first container being the center of government departments that need to see eye to eye, that need to be on the same page. And then you kind of gradually extend those containers, let's say to the sector departments at national level. Then you need to bring on board the provincial departments, in particular your offices of the Premier that play a key role, and also your local government departments. And then, of course, bringing in the local government as well, local authorities. So it is a difficult thing, but at a conceptual level, it's quite important, for people to understand what the basic aims and objectives are in order to build that kind of consensus. And I think the second thing that was not our idea, but what people were saying is that instead of trying to develop these technocratic solutions, let's look at practical things. What's the low-hanging fruit? What are the things that local authorities are battling with? And let's start solving some of those things. If it's even potholes that we're fixing, or the water treatment works, that's the key pressure point in a particular space. Let's fix those and let's start developing some energy. And, once we develop energy, we'll also create momentum and some traction. So I just wanted to say that for starters.
Thanks, Corey. Thanks. Lee, you left with a bunch of very difficult questions, but please go for it.
Yeah, and I'm not actually sure I have the wherewithal to answer them, but maybe some observations, which is so picking up on the kinds of things that Marejing and Jan was saying, is that I think I'm not so sure that the DDM from a technocratic point of view is the right solution. And I think if you're trying to design a collaborative program that encourages collaboration, you have to design that program right from the beginning in collaboration, right? You cannot collaborate via edict. It just won't ever happen. The departments will find ways to subvert your edict and follow their own path, because they have work to do without the collaboration. Although, of course, we all know that collaboration should make your work more impactful. So, Marejing, I think you were answering your own questions, and you were raising all the right things about how difficult it is. I don't have any wisdom other than to say that I'm not. Maybe the DDM started off as a desire to enhance collaboration, but somewhere along the line, it took a few detours, and that was one was into the COVID space, and so it did get traction there, and there was collaboration of some sort that was facilitated through the DDM network, if you want to call it that. But then having done that, it then sort of the effort kind of fizzled out, and they didn't, DCOG and the presidency didn't capitalize on that energy and the momentum that had been created to then put DDM back on the track where it was supposed to be in the first place. And then also there was although it is supposed to foster collaboration, a lot of the places where DCOG has intervened is around spatial planning, and that's not collaboration. So my sense is that they might have come up with a slightly different design if it had been done in conjunction with certainly in the first instance, as Corey was saying, the container approach, looking at the main players working together on designing what that program should look at and how it should be then institutionalized in successive containers gradually over time. Yeah, I don't think any one of the organizations, the actors that we interviewed, did not take the DDM seriously. Everyone takes it very seriously. Even with the study, when it landed in the presidency, they didn't brush it off. They hear the challenges. And we must bear in mind that every actor in that network will have a slightly different take on what they think the problem is going to be from their perspective. So, of course, the study was being done from the perspective of the presidency. And so the particular problem statement is in their minds, is the one that I presented to you today. And they didn't brush it aside. But just because they didn't brush it aside doesn't mean they know how to respond, or that they have the capacity to respond and then try and change the course of what is a really significant and hugely complicated program. So Renette, let me hand over to you because there's quite a few other hands there.
Yeah. I'm going to ask Sibongile and then Lindy. And please, we are running a little bit out of time. Let's get the questions in as much as possible at this point. Thanks. 2 questions per person.
Thank you, Renette. My question, Lee, is going to be very short and very precise. The issue is, why did we go the Big Bang approach of all 52 districts and not focused on the pilots and perfected them in all respect, using all sorts of change management tools, because that would have gained us traction in the 3. Now, even with the 1 plans, we should have really got the 1 plans to be perfected for the 3 pilots, so that everyone that actually wants to see a model 1 plan should actually be focused on that. Then the others could take the time to learn, because I'm of the view that this Big Bang approach did not take us anywhere. Everyone is now confused, and if everyone is now disillusioned, even the 3 pilots are not receiving the attention that they deserve, and they actually are not moving forward. The second issue for me is just the issue around, and I know Chair said only 2 issues, the SOEs are not geared into spatial planning. Isn't it one area that we could have actually said, let's actually hone into that area? How do SOEs plan, and how do they get their budget streamlined or especially targeted, so that we can actually say this is an area that we really want to clear off and we really want to focus on, instead of being everything to everyone. And because of the scale, no one can afford to be in all the 52 spaces, giving attention to all of them equally, doing their 1 plans at the same time. That's, for me, is focus and real focus towards purifying this system and making it work in a specific area and with a specific outcome that is measurable. Thanks.
Thank you. No, I think let me give Lindy a chance as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Renette. I mean, I couldn't agree more with what Sibongile has just said, because it is an issue of capacity. And the comment I wanted to make, mine is not a question, Lee, and thank you for the presentation, by the way. The comment I have is that it's a comment question, but not question to you. It sounds like we have subjected the DDM to the same problem that IDPs are suffering, where they require the participation of sector departments as well as SOEs, but they can't be in all the municipalities at once, because municipalities are actually expected to plan at the same time. The planning calendar is the same, and so I can't say it any more than what Sibongile said, that the Big Bang approach did not help us. But secondly, for me, the issue of responsibility and accountability, it cannot sit in two departments. It can't sit in the presidency as well as at DCOC, because that's been the problem, I think, in the local government space for other things as well. So more than anything else, I just want to know what's next. What does it look like? And where can the likes of GTAC come in and assist? Thank you.
Thanks. I think there's a very good question at the end there about how to go forwards, about what now. I'm going to hand over to you, and I have some comments about Big Bang approaches in South African government, but let me first hear you, Lee.
Okay. Yeah. Big Bang, a big idea doesn't have to be a big bang. And I always struggle to answer these kinds of questions, because I think there are people in this room that have got much more experience than I have about this. But certainly, I think why did they try and do everything all at once? Maybe over-optimistic, maybe naive, over-ambitious, maybe pressure, political pressure. We don't really know. And I agree with you. There are lots of things that they could have done maybe differently, Sibongile. They could have done a different kind of a problem analysis and said, well, maybe what we need to do is fix these three big issues with local government. Okay, who are the players that are then involved in those three issues? Let's target it much more. For example, how do we spatialize the SOE's work? Because it's important to have Eskom doing the right thing in the right place at the right time, etc., etc. And about responsibility sitting in more than one place at the same time, Lindy, I think it probably does sit in more than one place at the same time, but there are different types of responsibilities, and maybe that's not really been clarified enough in respect of a kind of a collaborative agenda. So Renette, over to you.
Yes. No, I think the idea that we have Big Bang reforms in South African government seems to have become the norm, and that there's such a scaredness around pilot rollouts. And I think in many ways we link it to people feeling deprived of some of the services of government. So if there's a new idea on the block, everybody wants it. And it prevents us from really shaping and actually understanding some of the implementation realities around problems. And we've got to start being very strict on pilot implementations is one of the positions I hold. But let me hand to Emmanuel. I see that's our last hand for the session. And then please, yeah, Emmanuel, you are not showing on the screen.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you, Renette. Thank you, Lee. Am I muted? Okay. Thank you, Lee, for the presentation and all the explanations. And thank you, colleagues, for all your precious inputs. Mine is about this very project as a project of GTAC. And I'm a bit puzzled that we actually don't know what is happening in the presidency system that was our client. Right. So I think that there is a need for us to follow up. And I remember being under immense pressure to start this project. They had very unrealistic deadlines, like most people, but and the energy was basically coming from the local government advisor to the president, right? And I see she's moving into new circles, and I want to know if the energy has died down in the presidency's system. You understand what I'm saying? So Lee and Corey and I, let's have a look at what has happened after we departed. I think it's very important that we look at that and we just don't let things hang in the air. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, there we go. This is how do we make sure that the insights and the experiences that people have analyzed actually continue to be implemented? And it's a very tough question for GTAC. I hope Madijeng is going to help us answer that. And let me give her a chance to come in, and then we have the last two people that have spoken, and then you can concluding.
You see, what I wanted to check, Lee, is did we present the outcome of this study to both of them? Was it always seems like to me that both of them in the room ought to engage with the outcome of this study and then begin to say where to, you know. So did they do that, or you only presented the outcome to the presidency? And then because at the moment what one feels is that there's a tough battle between presidency and COCTA. I don't know if it is better now that maybe what is his name, Temper maybe has left or something. But there seem to me like, for me, it is a tough battle where COCTA feels presidency is usurping their mandate, you know. So it doesn't come across as in we're enabling, you know. So that's why I'm just wondering in terms of how we dealt with the findings of the study between the two departments.
Lee, could you answer some of these questions for us, please? Or reflect on them. We don't expect you to have final answers.
Yeah, I mean, Madijeng, you raised something that was quite close to my heart, because at the time when Corey and I did the work, we suggested a way how they might land that work. Kind of a sequencing of it. So because it make some of this, you can imagine if you're in DCOG and you hear all of this, you must feel really demotivated. So the idea was to try and see if we could sequence the landing of the report in a number of places before coming together. And it didn't happen like that. Let me just leave it at that, although there was some kind of coordination and discussion that happened. But then, of course, then GTAC is no longer part of those discussions that happen afterwards. So it's enormously frustrating. We would like to have seen and been a fly on the wall. And so even when I mentioned like DCOG lost a number of people that were driving the DDM, so did the presidency. So some of that capacity that was sitting with us, that was being created while we were looking at all of these issues around the DDM and how to champion it and what needed to be put in place, those people left. They're not in the presidency anymore. So you have to land the report more than once. And I think those that are working in, you know, programs like City Support Program, you can't just land something once, you have to land it a few times in a few airports.
Yeah, I think part of the model that's being revisited on the GTAC work is to find a stronger coordination with people that can assist with the implementation of the findings, so that there's a whole big shift being organized, you know, seen for the work forwards for GTAC. I see more hands. I just want to check in with my coordinators. Amanda, what time is our Fundanati process starting before we go back to continuing the discussion? We're sort of having now a discussion repeatedly by the same people. I just want to sort of hear if there are other people that want to come in. And what time is the Fundanati starting? Please, Amanda.
The Fundanati starts at 12:30.
Okay, so we've got some bit of time. Lindy and Emmanuel, I would like us to move to new questions, please.
Thanks, Ronette. It's not a question. It's just to I think to reinforce the idea of what could be done next. There's a piece of work that we would like to do, which would be lessons from this piece, Lee and Corey. And with the theme of the center of government working together, basically. And because my view is that if we can start tackling on some of those issues, it might probably even address other issues that are not necessarily DDM related, but have the same kind of flavor and impact on local government. So I do like the idea of presenting back to the presidency at least the findings, but in the room there should be COCTA as well as National Treasury, IGR, so that we can at least formulate that way forward in a much more solid way. But the piece of work that we've asked to kind of like do a little bit more research so that we can kind of what's the word, reference other experiences in it is going to be very important. I think this is a very important piece of work. Thanks.
Thank you. Jan, you have some comment or question? And then I think I'm going to close the discussion.
So, Renette, as part of a way forward, we need to do a bit more work on this misperception on the budget, that there will be one budget. So we have a legislative framework, and that's partly why we're struggling to institutionalize, because the initial thought was we'll piggyback on current planning and other regulatory instruments. The budget system is highly regulated. It's not going to change for nobody. And let me state it a few times. If you don't understand this, I'll make time to explain this to people. So there's a misconception about the one budget. It's about packaging information to achieve the same thing. That doesn't mean the budget process is going to change. However, what we have to recognize at the national level, and we've communicated this already with the Budget Office and Public Finance, the spatial referencing in the national budget documents is completely missing. And as a Treasury, we're going to be blamed if we don't address that. And Pule is driving a process to help us to facilitate that. At the provincial level and a municipal level, we have institutionalized the spatial referencing part. But if the biggest part of the puzzle is missing, then as a Treasury. So this is a piece of work that I also suggest the team apply their minds on, because it's something that we must allay the fears. We need to guide the system, and we must also do what's right as a Treasury. Thanks.
Thanks, Jan. No, I mean, I'm going to ask Lee to comment on that. I just want to say that about 25 years ago, I wrote a little paper on GIS budgeting, and it sounds like we're still thinking around, you know, the same thoughts and the same concerns. But Lee, let me give Sibongile. I think you've put your hand up, and it seems to be like a discussion between a couple of people. Last person to talk, and then Lee, you could close up, and we've got to get ready for our next event.
I'm sorry, it's a legacy hand, please.
Ah. Then in that case, I think we're at the point where Sibongile, Sibongile, you then taken care of. Lee, could you just give us a few remarks from your side on all these interesting comments, all these interest here? We've had 65 people in the room listening to you on a Friday afternoon talking about a process on intergovernmental relations, which is a complex process. But give us your last words of wisdom, and then we conclude.
And I think, Jan, your comment really also strikes to the heart of the matter. So you have a particular concern about spatial referencing in budgeting and the kind of the controls and the authority for where the budgeting process should sit. Every one of those, you remember that big busy diagram I showed right at the beginning? Every one of those lines has a number of challenges like the one that you just expressed that relates to the DDM that has never ever been thrashed out. And if the DDM wants to proceed and capitalize on the good energy that has already been created, it has to start getting into that messy spaghetti and trying to pull out all of those challenges and coming up with solutions for them that relate to the DDM, but also make sense for the department that is responsible for managing that specific piece of work. So thank you very much. Thanks, Renette. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate it. I didn't think there'd be so many people. I'm sure the GTAC colleagues will circulate the presentation afterwards. But if you ever want to chat, we're here. We're always happy to talk about how to try and make some of these collaborative initiatives actually work for the benefit of local government.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lee. I'm going to take the untangling the messy spaghetti. That's my life mission now. For the next week, I'm going to use that phrase. We as bureaucrats, let's continue to untangle the messy spaghetti that we are given. And thank you very much.
I think this was great.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
It's more like unscrambling the egg, Ronette.
Yeah, those were old metaphors. So thank you very much for being here. I appreciate this. And please join us for this has been like an intellectually thinking about the messy spaghetti, the complex situations that we work with. Please join us now at 3:30 we have a Fundanati moment, as we call it, where we're going to be hearing about tips and tricks to use Teams. Those of you that cannot stand the people waiting in the lobby when you sent out a team invitation, join us. We'll show you how to stop that from happening. And see you now at 3:30. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lee. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Renette. Thanks, Jan.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Keep